if our lifespan was about 4 days, and in one of those days, let's say on the third day, you'd wake up and say a cloudy day, and all of a sudden you wouldn't see the sun, but you'll be able to perceive the light. And let's assume that about 5 minutes later or 5 hours later, it would start to rain. How do you just explain that to yourself? So I'm making this example because I'm trying to explain the fact that we don't understand life as we think we do, or reality as we are supposed to. The reason being that life is perceived by consciousness, and this consciousness we don't have full access into. In other words, for us to do so, we have to open our pineal glands and thus be in a state where the mind can reach the speeds of light. And in such states, we can perceive multiple dimensions, meaning that we can actually escape this reality. And unfortunately for us, this is something that governments are aware of, because our governments are formed by people who are initiated into secret societies. And so what usually happens during this initiation or spiritual initiation rites is that someone's pineal gland gets to be opened so they may perceive reality firsthand. In so doing, they may no longer have to argue about what exists and what does not, or how reality actually exists. But in the case that, for instance, you'll be dealing with whites, whom about 90% of them do not have functional pineal glands, drugs as well as magics are usually used to achieve the same results. And so all governments know that if our minds would be free, so much that we all know that the word government comes from the word government, which means that it's nothing more than a tool to control global consciousness. And in so doing, they are trying to preserve their dominion as well as rule. Because if we were to ascend in consciousness, actually, human beings were supposed to exist for no longer than 6,000 years on this earth, due to the fact that we are liability to each other, and being able to invent technologies as well as to develop our societies within the confines of our limited consciousness, would thus create weapons which would end life as we know it. And so with this being known by the creators of this universe, they made it a point that human beings will not exceed 6,000 years, and that time era has already lapsed, meaning that the reason why we are having these technologies today, where we can communicate with others throughout the globe, is due to the re-evolution of consciousness, which seeks to redeem itself by going back to what it was prior to us deliberately deciding to live our highly evolved civilizations, which involved spiritual initiations that open this pineal gland. And so the governments of this world know this, and they're trying to do their best to protect their dominion, because they know that at this current age, blacks would start to communicate their spiritual awakening. And when this happens, it will ignite their DNA strands, thus giving birth to kids who will be familiar with worlds other than this one. And because they will be living in a society which no longer enforces them into routines such as schools, or messes with their divine consciousness, in this case, ancestral memory, as well as their lucid dreams, intuition, and the powers of their imagination, which are taken away by them being in a classroom. So given that we are now living in a world where the Western society or Western dominion is no longer in effect, these kids will then be able to bring those worlds into our reality by the virtue of them being aware of those worlds and us being familiar with parallel dimensions. What this would do is it would force the planet to change in order to allow for such conditions to take effect. And in our case, this will result in the destruction of the US as well as Europe, so that a new consciousness permeates the globe. And like I was saying, all governments are familiar with this and are doing their best to prevent it from happening, because they know that their dominion begins and ends in this physical world of matter. And for this to continue, they must control us via money, military, and many other political as well as religious means. So that science is familiar with the fact that we live in a multidimensional reality, but these scientists are working for the same government, meaning that any so-called professionals who work within the systems are part of a conspiracy designed to divide as well as to exploit us human beings. And the whole idea is to preserve the existence of the Western race until it finds the ways to either destroy humanity as we know it, because currently they're searching for something they call the God particle. And this God particle is supposed to represent the beginnings of the universe, meaning that at the end of each universe, this is not according to Western science though, it's according to 360 degrees and an African spiritual system. At the end of each universe, the gods who inhabit that universe combine their minds in what is known as divine consciousness. When this happens, the illusion of separation comes to an end because everyone learns that they are the other person and that the universe they are perceiving is nothing more than a reflection of their own consciousness. And when this happens, their minds combine until they become one entity, because all of us are the manifestations of one God. When this happens, the universe shrinks to the size of a single particle. But before this happens, the laws of attraction take effect, meaning that likes attract likes and unlike attract unlike. And when this happens, the suns throughout the galaxies as well as the solar systems within the universe cluster together to form a gigantic sun, followed by 100 type planets, meaning planets or suns which are orbited by 100 planets. This shrinks down to 99, 98 ultimately until the entire universe collides into one single planet. When this happens, they've already ascended in consciousness, so much that when the universe is recreated again, they'll descend from this single particular planet and create the rest of the universe from this location. In our current universe, this location is the star Sirius, which is also known by the Dogons as well as the ancient Egyptians. But the beauty here is that when they ascend as gods with light bodies. But in our case, when they decided to become human beings, they actually developed physical bodies because they left their civilizations, meaning their initiation rites. And what this did is gave them physical bodies. So much that science usually discovers giant skeletons. And in Baalberg, as well as in many other places across the globe, we find monuments which are larger than life, proving that giants did exist on this planet long before human beings did. And with our 12 DNA strands, we return back to that state of becoming giant in appearance, but with light bodies in a lifespan of 7,000 years. This is due to the fact that in order for our lifespans to be prolonged, or in order for us to truly understand life, because I started by saying that at our level of consciousness, we cannot perceive life to its entirety due to the fact that life is a reflection of consciousness. And this consciousness requires our active pineal gland in order to perceive it to its entirety. And so with us being unable to do so, we can never be truly or truly claim to know or understand anything there is to know about life. What we do is we simply look at what happens around us due to our linear perspectives. And we conclude that life begins and ends where we see it. But in reality, we were gods before we became human. And this is we're also on the journey back to reclaiming this divinity. And there are evidences of us being gods prior to this, and that the idea of us evolving from apes after the Big Bang, etc., are all scientific lies created to preserve the current system and have no real relevance to reality. So much that their new science called string theory makes a complete blunder by trying to explain the Big Bang theory. Because according to Western science, or theoretical physics in this case, because all science seeks to preserve the idea of the Big Bang, the reason behind that is because if people do not know their beginning, they do not know where they are and where they are going. And without knowing your beginning, you won't know your identity. Without knowing your identity, you won't know your worth as well as your power. And thus you become exploitable by governments and anyone whom you will place your trust into or give your attention into. And by giving attention, was actually surrendering our souls to whoever we choose to perceive or pay attention to. And in this case, if that person happens to be lying to us, we are actually surrendering our souls to the devil. So science is completely familiar with the fact that God exists, and this God exists in the form of black people. And so the idea of finding the God particle is to discover the first universe upon which all life would have begun. And so after they would discover this, they would actually make a plan considering us black people as to whether to terminate us or to submerge us in one way or the other. But the idea here is that they are afraid of consequences because they still cannot explain what happens beyond life. In other words, they cannot explain the concept of death. But given that they can figure out this so-called God particle, who knows what they will do to us next? And one would even say that we've been given this window of opportunity in the form of the end of colonialism and these independent African states for us to quickly make a plan to do away with Western societies and create our own civilizations, which will allow us to evolve back to what we were prior to us becoming human and creating these different races. And this will be the gift to our children as well as ourselves, because we have the ability to reincarnate endlessly. The fact that you exist has to do with the fact that you've always existed, so much that your body is created by cells or DNA, which uses information stored in them, meaning that your very existence was known prior to your birth, long before your mother and father met, but it was simply timed through them, meaning that your existence is due to information which is eternal concerning your existence. And if we could start to embrace and understand this, we'll stop fearing death as well as consequences of being correct or against the system. And with these words, I would like us to seriously consider a new or a need for us to redesign society as we know it, and to find constructive leadership which will take us to the right direction concerning our souls also, because we have the ability to reincarnate endlessly and inherit our good works or our failure to do the right thing. And I thank you for your time again, and I hope you enjoy this video as well as many others which I've posted. Thanks again.